Are you safe, or are you about to encounter someone or something you wish you had never met? He had a bag of underwear, some of it female, some of it male. He had bits and pieces of belongings, cameras, clothing, notebooks. And all the while, he just looked so frail and harmless. Is there such a thing as a harmless person? Hail to the guardians of the watchtower by the north. By the powers of Mother and Earth, hear me. Show me thy glory. I invoke thee, O Ancient One. That was what he wrote in paint. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Alright, before we get to the story, two quick things to bring up. So, first of all, gonna do a wee shout out here. And I want to say a big shout out to Kimmy Bryant. Hello, Kimmy. How are you? Thanks for getting in touch. Thanks for helping me out with the upcoming episode. So, I said I'd say hello. And I also said I would say hello to your kids who are ages 6, 9, 11 and 17. And we have Bryson, we have Mike, we have Georgia, and we have Kai, who you've helpfully, in brackets, written pie, so I would know that it rhymes. So hello, Bryson, Mike, Georgia, Kai, and Kimmy. I hope you're all doing well. Alright. Other thing to mention just before we get going is bingo. It's time to get your bingo balls ready, or whatever you get ready. Okay, you're listening out for those phrases. Okay, those 10 key phrases that I told you at the end of last episode. They're also on the social media. You can find them, okay? Once you've got all 10, you let me know. And you might be in with a chance of winning a one-on-one extraordinary story. Okay, you sexy bastards, are you ready? Okay, let's go. It's nice to get away, isn't it? Bit of peace and quiet, bit of nature. Some time to reflect, time to think. I mean, if that's your thing. I know it's not everyone's thing, but for some people. I never thought it would be the kind of thing that suited me, but I don't know. These days, I'm loving a tree. These days, I really am. Find myself wandering through forests saying really boring things like, that's a nice tree. Then I think, what boring as hell statement that was. When did I turn into David Attenborough? Although he's not really trees, is he? He's more jellyfish and that sort of thing. Anyway, right, so looking for a bit of nature, looking for a bit of relaxation, we have Scott and Sean. Now, they're just looking for a break. Okay, they're friends, and they just want to go and, get back to nature, man. So they decide to go to the Appalachian. Yes, nailed it. Been practicing that all day. The Appalachian Trail. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the Appalachian Trail, it runs from Georgia all the way to Maine in the USA. Maine, you might be thinking, I recognise that. What's that again? It's the place where Murder, She Wrote is set. So, the Appalachian Trail, it's 2,200 miles long. And it goes through 14 states. Wowzers, it's massive. So, it's like it's a big tourist attraction. It's also very, very popular with lots of Americans who like to go hiking and walking and running and fishing or any of the above. So, here we have Sean and we have Scott. Let's talk about them for a second. So, Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer, they've been friends since childhood, growing up together in Virginia, and they're now in their late 20s. They're really good friends. And it's in 2008 they think, okay, let's take one of our little fishing trips that they take. Go drink some beer, sit around campfire, talking, be at one with nature. Bit of bro time, bit of a bromance, if you will. Hoes before bros and all that. No, hang on, I've mixed that up. Well, anyway, right, here they are. They're on the Appalachian Trail. They're near the southwest Virginia part. Now, what they haven't come to do is hike. Instead, what they've come to do is fish, have a campfire, and eat some food. Before I go any further, let me give you a picture of them. So, let's start with Scott. Right, Scott is blonde. He's about 5'8", and he's a fairly slim build. Scott is a cook. That is his profession. His friend Sean is a staggering 6'5". Holy moly. And he's 380 pounds. He is a big guy. He's a sturdy machine. And Sean is a truck driver. So it's part of their routine really to do these little weekends together, and here they are. Now, one of the things that gets said about this trail is that it's really friendly. It's a nice place to be, so if you bump into a stranger, you chat, you say hello. I mean, if it was me and you bumped into me, I'd want your entire life story, and then you would move on, and then I'd meet the next person and I'd repeat. But it's just courtesy. It's nice to be nice. So, on this particular Saturday in 2008, Scott the cook is fishing in a little creek. Now, the creek's about 3 miles away from the small campsite. Sean has stayed behind to get a fire going. He's drinking some beer, listening to some music, while his pal goes fishing. So Scott's having a great time. He's caught by this point 3 mammoth trout. Okay, not bad, says me. Like I know anything about fishing, fuck's sake. I've never been near a fishing rod in my life. Anyway, here he is. He's quite happy. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's thinking, great, I'm going to take these fish back and I'm going to cook them for dinner for my friend. And it's then that he sees a dog come wandering towards him. And in typical doggy style, it kind of comes over, has a bit of a sniff about, says hello. And Scott's looking at this dog and he's thinking, that is one skinny dog. You can see its ribs. That dog needs food. Then a man appears. The dog's owner, Scott thinks. And the man sort of slowly walks up to Scott and he says hello. Oh, it's nice day to be fishing in the creek, and they chat, Scott notices that the man, much like the dog, is a little bit scrawny, a little bit underfed. And what he starts thinking is, he wonders, is the guy potentially homeless? Like, does he live on the trail? Is that why he looks the way he does? But what throws Scott, what confuses him, is that the man is in almost pristine clothing. He doesn't look like someone who lives outdoors on the trail. You know, he's in very, very clean clothing. So they're just having a little, chit chat the way you do when you meet a stranger. The man says, "Oh, well, I don't know what you're doing fishing around this bit because you can't actually catch any fish here. There aren't any fish in this creek." And Scott is like, he knows different. So he's like, "Talk to the hand, because the face ain't listening. Yes, you can. I've caught loads of trout." He shows him the trout, and that's it. Fair enough. The man goes on his way, and Scott packs up his stuff and he heads back to the campsite. Now, when he gets back, he doesn't mention to Sean that he's met anyone. It seems almost insignificant. You know, you meet people here and there. You don't have to talk about every Tom, Dick or Harry that you've met. So a couple of hours pass and the two guys are getting ready to make dinner when, lo and behold, here comes the man with the dog. He walks sort of near where they are. He comes close to their fire. And Scott says, "Oh, hi. You were the guy I met earlier." Now Sean looks at him. Sean hasn't met the guy yet. Looks at him and he thinks, wow, this guy looks like he could do with some dinner. And so does his dog. So what they do is they invite him to sit down with them and have some of the fish that's been caught during the day. It's nice to be nice. It's good to be kind to strangers. Well, is it? Would Scott and Sean be thinking that hours later? No, they wouldn't. Because what they didn't know is that they had just invited a serial killer to sit down and have dinner with them. The three men, they chat over dinner. Sean has switched his car radio on, so there's music coming through. There's some beers going around. The skinny dog gets a meal, which is good because I was getting a bit worried about the skinny dog. They chat about sports, they chat about fishing, and when it starts to get dark, the man wanders over to where his dog is sleeping. And he says to the dog, "Right, it's time to be getting back to camp." So Scott and Sean, they ask him, "Where is your camp?" And he says, "Oh, it's just a few miles back the way." It's at this point, without any warning, Sean is struck across the back of the head, and for a moment, he has no idea what has just happened. He's disorientated and he thinks something must have fallen out of the sky and hit him in the head, or maybe something's fallen from a tree. But no, he's been smacked across the back of the head with the butt of a gun. So he sort of moans and he makes a noise, and Scott jumps to his feet. He's only sitting a few feet away, he jumps to his feet. And the man that they've invited to dinner is now pointing a gun at Sean. And Sean is still seated at this point. Remember I said Sean is a big guy, height-wise and body-wise. And as he tries to get up, he's trying to get out of the seat, but having been smacked on the back of the head, the stranger lifts his gun and he shoots Sean in the side of the face. In his cheek, right below his eye. Now at this point, Scott panics and he thinks, what am I going to do? And he decides to run. The man is coming towards him with a gun, and Scott turns and he runs for cover in a nearby clump of trees, and as he's running and running, he can hear shots being fired, but he's running as fast as his legs will carry him. Fucking hell. Talk about the perfect way to ruin a fishing trip. Bloody hell. So, Scott gets into a clump of trees and he's temporarily out of sight of the man. Now, it's getting dark now, and the fire is really the only thing that's providing any kind of light. Now, where he is in the trees, Scott has quite a clear view of the man, and he can see Sean is still seated, been shot in the face, and he sees that the stranger has tried to run towards the clump of trees that he's hiding in, but somehow he's managed to lose him. And he's watching the stranger, and the stranger sort of halfway between the clump of trees and Sean, who's seated, and he can see that the guy's thinking, oh, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? He goes back towards Sean, and he raises the gun again. Now, at this point, filled with what I can only imagine is the desire to live, that instinct to try and fight, Sean manages to get up out of his seat and he charges at the stranger, knowing fine well that if he was to get to him, he could crush him. Okay, yes, he is bleeding out of his face, but the sheer size of him, he could do some damage to this scrawny little man. But before he can do that, the man shoots again. He hits Sean in the chest with a bullet, and this is amazing. Amazing, I tell you. This bullet impacts Sean right in the chest, but it doesn't kill him. He still has the ability to stand, even though he's swaying about. He's staggering all over the place. He's still upright. And he thinks, I need to get to my car. I need to get into my car. It's the only way that I'm going to get away from this situation. And so, his car, which is a Jeep, it's only a few feet away. And he thinks, if I can get into that car, I might just stand a chance here. He has no idea at this point where his friend Scott is. Well, we do. He's in the trees. He's watching all of this. And what's so interesting about Scott, right? This fascinates me. It's always bloody fascinated me. People who, in these situations now, obviously adrenaline is at its highest level that your body is going to be producing ever under that kind of circumstance, in that situation. What can happen there is people don't know that they've been injured. Now, I've always been fascinated by this. People who say things like, I had been stabbed and I didn't know I'd been stabbed. I'm pretty sure I've brought this up in previous stories. Or, like, this one always completely amazes me. People who lose a limb and they don't know they've lost it straight away. Like, they can't feel that that's gone. Well, this is essentially what's happening for Scott, is that he's aware that there is blood trickling out of his neck, running down his arm. And he at first thinks, I must have caught that on something when I was running. What he doesn't realise is he's actually been shot in the neck. Not only that, he's been shot in the neck and he's been shot in the back. And it's only now, hiding in those trees, that he's aware of that. He puts his hand to his neck. He feels the hole. And he thinks the only thing that I can do here is try to plug the hole with my fingers. And that's what he does. So he starts just pressing on the hole in his neck. By this point, Sean is safely in his Jeep. And what he does is he frantically rolls up the window and he puts his hand up against the glass, thinking, if this man shoots me again, he'll maybe just get my hand, and I can deal with that. I can deal with my hand being shot. If he goes for my head one more time or my body, that's going to be it for me. But if he goes for my hand, I might get out of this. The man raises the gun at the car and tries to shoot at Sean one more time, but the gun is out of bullets. When the man realises this, he runs. He disappears. Sean can't see where he's gone, he just knows that he's out of sight for a moment. So he turns on the engine and he realises he is going to have to drive like a bat out of hell if he is going to survive this. At this point, he's got 2 fucking bullets in him. Oh. So he starts the Jeep and he heads for the road. Now, Scott is in the trees. He hears the car start and he thinks, I need to run to that road. If I can get to that road, Sean can pick me up. And so he starts running. Now it's dark and he's moving away from the fire, so he's just running towards darkness basically at this point. He does his best to try and sort of follow the car sound, and he tries to remember roughly where does he think that the road was when they drove in. He's trying to remember this. I have to say at this point, if that was me, I'd be fucked. Honestly, my sense of direction is so bad. I've said it before previously. My sense of direction is so awful. If I was this guy, if I was Scott right now, I'd start running. I'd probably end up in Australia. I'm not kidding you. I just honestly. But Scott's trying to remember where the road is and hear what he can of the sound of the Jeep. And he's running and he's running. And eventually he runs and he finds the road and he gets out and he's staggering around the road. He's still plugging the bullet wound in his neck with his fingers. And he sees Sean driving the Jeep down the road. Sean pulls the car over. Scott gets in as fast as they can and the 2 men speed off. Now, they're on a dirt road at this point. They're on this road that you would really only ever do, I don't know, maybe 20 miles an hour on this road for your own safety, for that of others, and they're doing it at 50 miles an hour. And the worst thing here is that Sean is at the wheel and he's beginning to lose consciousness. He's beginning to lose vision in his eyes, and his head is beginning to loll forward as he's trying to drive at 50 miles an hour on these tight little dirt roads. So, Scott, still holding the gun wound in his neck, says to Sean, if you can work the pedals, I can work the steering wheel. Press the pedals and I'll use my other hand to steer the steering wheel. And so as they're driving, they get to things like a small bridge. They have to navigate, trying to drive the car with Scott holding the steering wheel. They have to try and get over these small bridges, and they are veering all over the roads. They are in danger of crashing into trees, the side of a cliff at any moment. But they just have to keep going. Scott says at this moment all he remembers thinking is, we have to keep driving, otherwise we are both going to bleed to death in this Jeep. Holy guacamole, that is terrifying. As the 2 men are driving, they're aware that there is a car behind them. A car is following them at high speed and its lights are bright. It's the man. He's gotten into Scott's car, which was back at the fire at the campsite, and he's driving after them. The 2 men try to drive faster, and so the man behind, he drives faster, and then suddenly the man disappears. So they keep on the road, and finally they see a light coming from a house. They drive towards it and they stop. Scott gets out of the car and he runs towards the door. Melissa Miller, whose house this is, she opens the door. She sees a man standing bleeding on her porch, and at first she thinks it's a joke. What a weird thing to assume. She assumes that one of her grown-up sons is playing a prank on her. But the man on her porch is shouting that she needs to call an ambulance. And she realises, okay, this isn't a joke. Sean gets out of the car and he staggers towards the house. Scott has to run to him and try to hold his friend up. While they wait for the ambulance, Melissa, she wraps both men in blankets and they lie down on her porch, soaking it in blood. Now here's the issue. The house that they've gotten to is 40 miles away from the nearest hospital. That is a lot of miles for two men who are bleeding to death. That's a long time to wait. But wait is all that they can do. Now, obviously, Melissa is on the phone to 911 and she's saying to them, you need to get something here as soon as you possibly can, or these two men are going to bleed to death on my porch. What I think is so interesting, and it's a kind of testament, I suppose, to their friendship, is that both men will remember that as they lay on that porch, their thoughts were consumed with not themselves, not their own survival, but the survival of each other. Each of them will say they remember looking at the other and thinking, I don't think he's going to make it. After an hour, an ambulance team arrive via helicopter and they get to the two men. Sean is immediately taken to the helicopter. By now he's in a really bad state. Scott is lying on the porch and he's still got his fingers pressed to his neck. And he's aware that he's injected with something. It's a sedative. And he describes that what happens to him in this moment is he feels the sedative hit him almost instantly. His eyes were open. He could hear everything crystal clear around him. And what he hears is this. The paramedic saying, this guy is about to lose his pulse. He's not going to make it. Scott thinks at this point, am I dead already? Am I watching this as a dead man? I mean, that is freaky as fuck. Ooh. Anyway, they get Scott into the helicopter, not convinced that he'll survive the journey to the hospital, but they've got to try. When they get there, Scott is still alive. His pulse is very, very faint. And both men are rushed into critical surgery instantly. But just before they're about to go in to that critical surgery, a detective stops both men and he pulls out a photograph. And he says, is this the man who did this? Sean and Scott, they look at the picture and they acknowledge that, yes, this is him. This is the man. And then they're taken into the operating theatre. Now, I thought at first that was really weird. Now, I know detectives, right? I know they have to work really fast. But I was thinking, it's a bit odd, as they're just going into surgery, to show them both a photograph and be like, is this the man who just did this to you? But then, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, actually that makes perfect sense. Because what that detective is thinking is, if these men don't survive this, I will never have had any actual verification that the man in the picture is actually who I think it is. Sean, who is in a slightly more stable position than Scott, asks if the detective has caught this man, if they know who he is. The detective tells him yes, he's been caught. He's pretty badly injured from a car crash. And that car crash is when he was chasing Sean and Scott down the road at high speed. He had driven into the side of a cliff, smashed the car badly, and now he had head injuries. Where is he now? Sean asks. The detective says, he's in that room over there. And he points to a room that Sean can see across the hall. Can you imagine? Literally feet away from you, the man who just tried to kill you. So the picture the detective has shown them is of Randall Lee Smith. For you true crime lovers out there, you might know the name Randall Lee Smith. A creepy, slimy, horrible looking little bastard if ever you saw one in your life. Randall Lee Smith was 67 years old, and at one time he had majorly been on police radar. But then, over time, that had disappeared. He'd fallen off the radar. Well, he had, except for Detective Tom Lawson, who was the guy in the hospital with the photograph. He had been obsessed with Randall Smith for years. Now, this was 2008, as I told you. Back in 1981, there had been a horrific double murder in the exact same spot. And I mean the exact same spot where Sean and Scott were camping on that day. A woman named Susan Ramsey and her friend Robert Mountford were doing, they were doing almost what these two guys were doing, when all of a sudden they vanished. Days later, Susan's body would be found butchered inside a sleeping bag. She had been beaten, she had been sexually assaulted, cut with knives and then shot, and her friend Robert had been shot in the back of her head. Now, at the time, in 1981 when this happened, police had a really tricky time finding who did it. But this detective, Tom Lawson, who was the lead detective, he worked tirelessly to piece it all together. And when he'd done all of his police work, it led to a man called Randall Lee Smith, who lived nearby. You see, Randall Lee Smith lived only 20 minutes walk from where these crimes had taken place. And that's why when Scott met him that day when he was fishing, that's why he had on clean clothes. Because Randall, he lived in his house, and every day he would walk the trail, but each night he would return back to his house. Randall had gone to prison, but thanks to the good old 1980s laws and the courts, he'd only served 15 years for those double murders in 1981. Unbelievable. So, after 15 years, what would that be? 1996, he was let out of prison, free to return to his house and to stalk the trail as he wanted. So for 22 years, this man had been stalking that trail. Now, in those 22 years, when he was out of prison, did others go missing along the Appalachian Trail? Yes, plenty of people. Did Randall Lee kill them? Hard to say. Detectives would love to say Yes, and what they'd love to be able to do is pin every missing person on him, but the evidence has never really quite been there. Until now. They have him on this. He's in hospital. He's in the room next door to Sean and Scott, who he tried to kill that very afternoon. So he's going to go to prison for this. Randall is, of course, just denying all involvement. I mean, what an idiot, right? What an absolute idiot. He's telling detectives he had nothing to do with it. And they're saying, well, okay, why then were you chasing these two men in one of their cars at high speed along this road then? And he comes up with loads of bullshit excuses. But ultimately, what it comes down to is him being charged. So Randall is charged. A court date is set. And during all of this, I'm glad to say, both Sean and Scott have survived their surgeries, and neither of them have any lasting damage. I mean, they need a lot of therapy, they need months of healing, but, you know, a lover survival story, both men are alive and well. So with Randall Lee looming in court, Tom Lawson, the detective, is thinking his dreams have come true. Behind bars, he's thinking, I can finally interview him about the last 22 years. I can get the names, the dates, the details about all those people who've been going missing. In the meantime, Randall's house is ripped apart by police, and what they find is they find lots of women's underwear, different sets of men's underwear that don't belong to him. They find various bits and pieces of clothing from different sort of times, you know, the way they can look at something and go, that looks like, that t-shirt's like 10, 15 years old, why has he got a bit of that? Oh, that's more recent. There's books, there's trophies is essentially what the police think that they've got here. Trophies of people that he's killed along that trail. In the woods near the area where the attacks happened, they find a stash of knives, axes, a meat cleaver, books on religion, all left by Randall. And he's used paint to paint on a wall the following prayer. Hail to the guardians of the watchtower of the north, by the powers of mother and earth, hear me. Show me thy glory. I invoke thee, O ancient one. What a load of pish. I am available for voiceovers if anyone needs them. I could, you know, if you know anyone crying out for a voice. So the police, right, they're delighted because they're like, answers are coming. So his day in court arrives, and there's a twist that the detectives did not see coming. The defence and the prosecution, in his case, decide that rather than a long, drawn-out court case, they'll simply accept a plea bargain. If Randall says he was involved, then he can go to prison, and we don't need some long, drawn-out court case. He'll get a shorter sentence, and that's fine. You know, Randall's still trying to say, well, you know, I was involved, but I wasn't the one who had the gun. Yeah, mate. Tell your story while you're walking, or whatever the phrase is. No, that's not it. Tell your story to the judge. Well, whatever the phrase is. So, Randall is sentenced to 20 years for attempting to kill Sean and Scott, and he goes to prison. Now, he's still quite beaten up from the car crash. And as police get ready to interview him about those missing years, Randall Smith dies. He lasts only 4 days in prison before dying from complications caused by the car crash. Where this leaves the story is that Scott and Sean, they make full recoveries, and to this day they will go on fishing trips along the Appalachian Trail. Both men are fine. The sudden death of Randall Lee means that for Detective Tom Lawson, he will never get to hear the names and the details of the people who went missing and who only Randall Smith can talk about, meaning that the families, the partners, the children who want to know desperately if this is the man who killed their loved ones along that trail will never get the answers. And so ends the story. Okay. Got to love a survival story with a serial killer thrown in. I mean, that is true crime doing its thing there, isn't it? That is woo. Okay, well, hope you enjoyed that. If you want to get in touch, you can. Please do join the Facebook group. Say hello. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Thank you for everyone who's helping with the upcoming episodes. Really appreciate the time that you're taking to do that. I have personally, hello. What's wrong with my speech tonight? I have personally thanked you all, but I'm just saying it again. So some special episodes featuring listeners coming soon. Remember that I do have podcast merchandise if you want to buy yourself a little notebook, little shower curtain, towel, bag, t-shirt, long sleeve top. It's all there. You can head on over to the ESP store. You can find a link to it through the Facebook, but it's on all my social medias. Alright, I'm going to get out of here, and until we speak again, okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.